right, welcome to today's episode on the Inside Tech podcast. Me and Rika have today a guest talking with us about batteries and recycling of them, Arne Seeger from Stena. Welcome, Arne.
Thank you, Kari. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit. What do you do in Stena?
Yeah, let me start by I'm Arne. I'm living in Hamburg, that's in northern Germany, and I'm 38 years old, have 2 kids and wife. So you have the person who's talking a little bit in a frame. I've been working in the recycling industry with a company called Stena. Stena is a recycling company from Sweden. It's based in Gothenburg. It's a family-owned company, and I basically returned to Stena after being away for 2 years, and I have an expertise in electronics recycling, and I've been doing sales and production as the 2 roles mainly. And sales meaning selling service contracts for getting rid of your waste. Production meaning taking care of the machines together with the fitters, the electricians, and doing that for 3 different plants in Germany. And Stena has sold these 3 plants in Germany about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, and has refocused in the last 2 years, has started before selling on lithium-ion battery recycling. So this is my role in the last 1.5 years full-time, and before part-time when we're still doing the electronics recycling.
Yeah, the batteries is interesting, new, and they're recycling them new business. I think Rika has a little bit of the background on the batteries and how they are expected to develop as a market.
As this is a podcast about e-mobility, so for sure we will talk about battery at some point. Batteries are the most expensive part of an EV. Typically, they count for about 30% to 40% of the value of the EV. And as more people buy electric vehicles nowadays, the demand for batteries has shot up by 65%. I have some data here. So the increase is from around 300 gigawatt hour in 2021 to more than 500 gigawatt hour in 2022. But there's this saying that I read somewhere, batteries are the Achilles heel of electric vehicles. They pose a problem. These batteries are tough to repair, reuse, or recycle. Making the batteries also means using up important resources like lithium and water. So when you ask the question, are electric vehicles really eco-friendly? The answer is not really that direct because it depends on how we manage these downsides associated with their batteries. So, which is exactly what Arne is doing in Stena, which is managing the batteries recycling.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Because definitely like there's a raw materials for batteries. Of course, there's new technologies with different raw materials, but also the recycling. And as far as I've understood, Arne, that actually like the battery recycling itself is not yet that ready infrastructure around there. Is that right?
That is right. And it's especially right in Europe and in the Northern and Southern America. You can see that battery recycling has been around for lithium-ion batteries in Europe and in China for quite a while, and also in South Korea. But there is 2 things. You can recycle a battery to something, to some raw material that you can use somewhere. And you could recycle it to salts being 99, usually 0.95% clean. And then you could use them in batteries again. So the requirements, and I only have one example on top of my head where you could deliver it. For example, cobalt, a mineral we might talk about again, but cobalt can be used in the color industry as a pigment and the cobalt salts. But then it doesn't have to be as clean. But if you want to put it again in a new battery with the NCM chemistry, that would mean you have to clean up 99.95%. And that infrastructure to clean it up to that level, that doesn't exist in Europe. And we call it PCAM and CAM. That stands for precursor cathode active material, and then cathode active material manufacturing. And as of today, maybe I'm a bit limited, but I don't know anyone who's doing these 2 steps in Europe at scale. There's for sure a lot of research and a lot of companies trying it. But what we have today is a lot of companies like Stena that offer collection services and prepare the batteries for the recycling. And then some companies that go the step further in mechanical shredding and so on, that you see all over the world. And then if you want to see all the rest of the chain followed by metallurgy processes You have a few in Europe, and then the last two steps, PCAM and CAM, you only find them in Asia at a larger scale, let's say. And I think a little bit in Japan, a little bit more in South Korea, and by far the most in China. And they are now expanding these processes also to southern Chinese, Southeast Asian countries like Thailand and Malaysia.
So did you say just that the Stena, that what you offer is basically your organizing the collection and so on, and then you move forward to some other operator kind of to process the batteries, or how it works for you at the moment?
Yeah, and just this year we have opened. So the first step is collection. You need a special truck. It's a set of laws in Europe. It's called the ADR. That's for hazardous goods, or dangerous goods on the road. And then you have the hazardous waste regulation that, for example, limits that you cannot cross a country, not even in Europe, before declaring it to authorities and getting approval. But Stena is doing that with the trucks and getting the approvals and moving the waste to where it belongs, to the proper recycling channels. And in 2023, we opened our first mechanical treatment line. And that means you take a battery apart. Let's say you have a housing, you have some wires inside. You discharge all that, you take it all apart. But the actual batteries, the cells inside, those you put on that mechanical line and you shred them. And in the line, we take out, for example, copper, aluminum, plastics, and the electrolyte it is in. The electrolyte is the thing that makes the battery a little bit dangerous. When that's out, then the risk of fire is very, very close to zero. And then the remaining fraction is what we call the black mass. And that contains the most valuable metals. That's where you find, for sure, lithium. And then depending on what you put in, you find cobalt and nickel and manganese. And that we cannot recycle ourselves. So you have a mixture which has a lot of carbon black inside, and a little bit of residue from copper and aluminum from the process before. You always like 1 or 2% stay inside. And then you have the other nice things that you want that can only be taken out in hot processes. They are either called hydro-metallurgical or pyrometallurgy. That's the step we don't have in Stena, and we also don't intend to build one. To give some scope, to make a facility that can accept batteries and store them. You're in for a few years of permission and you invest a few million euros. And when you want to make a recycling line that has a mechanical that opens the batteries and produces this black mass, you would typically pay something between 10 and 20 million. Stena has done a little bit more, but we also added a few machines to get cleaner fractions. But let's say 10 to 20 million. But if you want to go hydro-metallurgical treatment, then you reach hundreds of millions of investment. And that's why you really check the market, how much does exist in your area. And it seems that there's a lot of investment going on all over the world, especially in China, the US, and Europe.
When do you think that there is a capacity to kind of recycle the whole battery efficiently in Europe, for example? I guess at the moment there is not capacity or technology in place to recycle completely the battery.
Yeah, it's not possible. There's some interesting trials going on, and I think a few of them will go through and a few will stop. I think it will take easily 10 years from now until we have what we call a closed loop inside Europe. We can close a loop today, but it usually requires us to send to someone. The hydro-metallurgical treatment you can still have in Europe. That could be a company like Umicore or Fortum from Finland, or BASF will soon open such a plant as well in a bigger scale. But between that and a new battery, there's still the other two process steps that need to be done somewhere else, as far as I know, let's say. And I think that will be in Asia for quite a while. But the Asian companies, they are looking, if you look at Germany, you have a cell factory called CATT. That's a subsidiary of CATL. So the biggest cell manufacturer of the world sits in the middle of Germany. And they are currently importing the foils that they need for producing the cells from China. But they would like to make the foils in Germany. And when you make the foils in Germany, the next step would be to also do the last step, the CAM step in Germany. And or at least, let's say, maybe around Central Europe somewhere, where energy cost is maybe a bit lower than in Germany. But these companies might be the ones taking that technology over from China and bringing it to Europe to save logistics cost, while European startups are at the same time trying to get it right and starting it from scratch. But that usually has much smaller scale. So you would talk about a few thousand tons versus usually 100, at least 10,000, but more like 100,000 tons if an Asian player is planning something in Europe.
Yeah.
So, but to answer the question, 10 years, I would say.
Yeah, the handling the batteries is requires a lot of investments. Even the transportation, like you mentioned, is because of old batteries or even possibly damaged batteries. They might be a little bit dangerous to transport, so it requires plenty of arrangements. So, who are your actually like a typical customers for Stena at the moment when you are collecting the batteries?
Yeah, a typical customer could be Volvo, Volvo cars, or Volvo trucks, or Volvo CE construction equipment. That's the headquarters in Sweden. There's a lot already being taken care of in terms of waste. There's a program, it's called Total Waste Management, but you call it you could call it just take all the waste from a factory, industrial waste. So you just have one partner, one portal where you order your trucks and your skips and so on. And factories all over Sweden and Poland and also Finland. And Norway, Denmark can do that with Stena. In Germany, typically it would be Remondis, or in France it would be Veolia. So the big recyclers that are known, and they use these sales relationships to just add on the truck that takes away the batteries. Now, where's that truck going? If you ordered from Stena, it would actually go to Stena, because Finland has just opened the first battery storage and acceptance facility where we dismantle and discharge batteries. And Norway is in the process of opening one. The one in Sweden is already running for 2 years and has just been upgraded now with the mechanical line. And in Denmark, I think we are also running for nearly 2 years by now. Same in Germany. So in Germany is the only country, I have to say that because I'm doing the job here, where we don't have own trucks and where we would not be able to offer this total waste management service, where we are not the one that handles also the paper waste and the residual waste and so on. In Germany, we would be the one that actually someone else might send the batteries to. So if you had some, you could order it from us to get picked up, and we would ask a logistics company to transport it to us. Or you go to your usual waste handler, could be Remondis, and you ask them, can you take batteries? And they might say, yeah, that's close to Stena's place. We will transport it to Stena for you. So these are basically the two ways. That's what can happen when you want to get rid of some old batteries.
Let's talk a bit about regulation. I think I read somewhere that there is this new set of recycling guidelines for batteries from the EU government. And the target is going to be a lot more strict from today. I think currently 50% of the battery weight must be recycled, and by 2030 it will be increased to 70%. And also I read that around 90% recycling rate for materials like cobalt and copper will be required from 2025 or 2026 onwards. I think you are aware about this, right? But how do you see this? Like, are these targets attainable? And is the recycling industry actually ready for these requirements?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you said the recycling rate, and that is calculated for batteries in a way where you compare weights,
Yes.
and you only accept material recycling. So it means you cannot use the energy contained in organic material. You cannot incinerate it and generate electricity or heat. That would not be considered a percentage, let's say. And looking at a battery, and let's say looking at a battery cell, which is in most cases what we can get as a recycler, where we are measured on, there is electrolyte and there is carbon inside in form of graphite. And these two fractions are quite interesting because as of today, 50% we can reach, but we can just about reach that. And the keys to getting more is to be able to recycle the electrolytes, but not burn it, and to recycle the graphite and not burn it. And that's quite tricky part because we haven't found ways yet to get the material back. You could call it a form of downcycling. You know, you burn it, you get heat, and you get electricity depending on where you burn it. But you don't really get the material back yet. And as far as I know, there's no one getting all of it back. You always have some losses. And that's the other part that you mentioned, because the EU is mainly looking on critical resources. And I think that graphite, I'm not sure, but I think that graphite and electrolyte are not very high on that list. But for sure, nickel and cobalt are, and lithium. So that's why the EU would like to have tougher targets really specific to these elements being inside the batteries. And those targets are really easy to attain because everyone right now in the recycling industry is getting paid quite a lot of money by the downstream processes. So by the buyers, that could be the PCAM and the CAM manufacturers for batteries, so that you can basically pay your whole process by the revenues from these fractions. So it is really natural to try to upgrade it as much as possible, get especially cobalt and nickel out as much as possible. But lithium has seen a big rise and a huge fall. I think it had a peak last year around spring, and it dropped down dramatically from then, but it is still worth quite a lot, something around $20,000 per ton. And so that's quite a high value. If you compare it to something other high value, that would be copper, it's around $8,000 per ton. So it's higher than copper, and companies in other realms of recycling, they love to look for copper. And to put it a bit in perspective, to steel, quite a common commodity that you can trade all over the world, that would be around $300 US per ton. So that's where these metals are priced much, much higher. And that means the recyclers will do a lot of research and a lot of strain perfecting their machines and designing new machines to get more lithium, more cobalt, more manganese, and more nickel out. So I think these are for sure attainable. We have to find ways to get the recycling rate up to 70%. I'm not so sure that we will do it, but I think we have quite some time left. When was it? Rika, what did you say?
It's for the lithium 70% by 2030. And for the other, like cobalt, copper, and nickels, is 90% recycling rate from 2026 onwards. So yes. It's not too long from now.
But it sounds achievable to me. And what you do is you consider that you can transport it to Asia and you can have it refined with the normal losses that we see today. It's already attainable in my point of view. I don't know a few things. For example, you have a company called Umicore, and the lithium goes into, as far as I know, into fly ash. So how much of that can be recovered? They do recover it, and I don't know the percentages there. So that might be a little bit of a strain, but the processes that are being constructed are usually hydro-metallurgical treatments where you get the lithium in leaching. That is sometimes a good way. Sometimes it also has some drawbacks. It needs better material inbound, better black mass. But with these hydrometallurgic plants, it's for sure attainable.
All right, that's interesting. And yeah, it's obviously like the effort to develop the technology is driven by the raw material prices. And I think Rika has some insight about how the battery prices are expected to develop.
I think Anna mentioned it already that it was quite a big news when we talk about the downward trend of battery price. The price went up some time ago during the pandemic, but it's going down steadily now. And some prediction mention the cost will fall up 47% by 2030. How will that affect your business or the industry in general?
It affects especially the really first step after transport, before you go into recycling. There is a little chance that a battery gets reused, especially if it's a car battery pack and not a small cell. The bigger the battery and the more of its SOH, state of health, it still has. We measure that really basic in terms of the residual capacity. There's super many metrics that you could measure, but let's say out of the original 68 kilowatt hours of a battery, you still have something like 62. So roughly 90% is still in, then that would mean it's good enough SOH for reuse. And the cheaper new batteries get, the less these reusable batteries are attractive. And we can see today that for energy storage systems, I would consider that a downcycling because the strain on the battery is less than in a car. But we can use it in a different energy application called energy storage. And quite a lot of these packs that we get in today are reusable. Some companies draw a line at 80% SOH, some draw a line at 75, and the hardcore guys, they draw the line at 70% SOH of a pack, and then they set it up in a less strainy environment. And by that I mean, if you run a car, you charge and discharge your car quite fast sometimes, and you set the energy storage systems up so that they cannot discharge as fast and also not charge as fast. So the battery has more cycles left than if it would have stayed in a car. And that is, I mean, you get paid maybe half of the price of a new battery at the moment if you are delivering a good battery above 80% SOH. The only thing you have to do is properly test it. That's not easy in itself, but assuming you can test it and you can put a report on it, this price, when that goes down below a threshold where the person doing the tests, and that could take a day on one battery pack. There's quick tests as well, but it's sometimes a bit tricky to get to the battery in the right place. Let's say maybe half a day for one person. If the price is less than a few €100 in Europe, then you would probably stop doing the reuse at all, and everything would go to recycling. So that is an effect in the recycling industry that you see coming in from the price of a new battery.
The market is quite interesting. Like the batteries have been recycled before, but now through the electric vehicles, there is a more and more market, let's say, for recycling also, and demand is growing constantly. And many existing operators, like Stena, is investing there. And there, you mentioned there's startups coming in. How do you see the kind of competition? Like it's now everybody is trying to find their spot in the chain and market what they want to grab with the investments. But how do you see the competition at the moment in the battery recycling business?
Yeah, it's been a run onto the markets from some companies in the last years. It's slowed down a little bit. And of course, I'm looking at the German market quite a lot. And I'm hearing from my colleagues about Finland, Fortum is an example, and Sweden. In Sweden, you have Revolt. It's a company run also by Northvolt. Northvolt is a cell factory that has opened in a town that I can't pronounce in northern Sweden. It's called Skellefteå or similar. And Revolt is slowly moving onto the market. That's a thing where a cell factory brings their own internal recycler to the market. The same is going for CATL. They have their own recycler, but it's not in Germany yet. It is doing the job for CATL, the recycling job, already in China. And it might come, but for now, they are waiting. They're waiting how it develops. So we can see that in Europe, there is a move from OEMs of cells and also from OEMs of cars to establish own recycling capacity. Mercedes-Benz has done so in Germany, and Volkswagen has done so. And as I just said, for the battery packs, Northvolt is doing that, and some others are thinking about it. But I believe a little bit more competition, because it's coming to market faster, is done by a company called Li-Cycle and by the medium-sized companies, especially around the countries that are known for their waste handling in those countries already. Stena is a big one. The big ones usually move a bit slower. You can see that Alba hasn't announced anything. Veolia is a bit slow to move out of France. They have something in France, but not much more. And Stena is rolling it out in all the 7 countries Stena is in. Then there is a lot of companies that have been there. And a company that I'm happy that we have it's called Accuray in Germany. They are on the forefront of developing these processes, and they are really, really good at what they are doing. They are increasing capacity. So they are there, but they are rebuilding and trying to take more volume from the market. And new players moving in. We have just seen one open or build and announce the capacity of 20,000 ton in Germany. We have players trying to move in from South Korea into Europe. In Germany, one called Sang-Il is trying it in Germany, has already established in Hungary. So there is a high interest in grabbing these future volumes. At the same time, we can see that there's a lack of recyclable batteries on the market. So what all companies are trying to do is grab a share of the production waste. And our internal prognosis right now, it was a bit different 2 years ago, but right now is that until roughly 2030, maybe even 2032, the production waste, that is mainly the waste from a factory that would produce cells, is more all over Europe than old batteries. And then I would say EV car batteries especially, but also taking into account construction equipment. That could be a wheel loader, it could be a crane, could be a forklift truck. Combine all these big battery packs, all those together, they will wait another nearly 10, maybe like 8 to 10 years until they become the same amount of waste as the production waste we see from the European factories. So a lot of us recyclers are looking for the production waste to fill the factories in the first 10 years, and then later to switch over to these actual battery waste that we are here for.
You mentioned that like the cell manufacturers, car manufacturers, and so on are also investing in this area. Who is actually like kind of to meet the recycling requirements? Who is actually responsible to arrange? Let's say when the EV is built, the battery is installed. Who is supposed to make sure that there is a proper kind of infrastructure in place and the process to get the battery in the recycling at the end of the life cycle of the vehicle?
Yeah, to me, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that it's always the, I need to find that English word, but the company that puts it on market. So if you are a cell and a pack producer, a battery pack for a car, you don't really put it on the consumer market. You sell it B2B to another company that is the car OEM. They install it in their vehicle and they sell the car to a consumer. So they are the ones putting it on the market, on that B2C market. And they have the responsibility to take it back. To some extent, these production wastes are out, because if you run a factory and you have a lot of production waste, let's say a typical gigafactory as of today in Europe would have 10 gigawatt hours production capacity. There's bigger ones, there's smaller ones, but let's say 10. I would assume there's a few thousand, maybe 3,000 tons of battery material waste coming out each year. And that would be, I mean, an average pack might be 500 kilos at the moment, maybe a little bit less, but that could be like 600,000 car battery packs coming out of a medium-sized gigafactory in terms of scrap. And because that is factory scrap, that is of course not the responsibility of the car OEM that wants the battery later. They have to take care of it themselves as industrial waste, and they can do that themselves or hire that out. For cars, it's, in my point of view, it's the car dealer that gives the car out. But in most cases, if you have a dealership, they have a contract with their OEM, and the OEM will take care of the recycling of the batteries, because the place where you buy the car, they probably cannot handle that.
Yeah, because I was really thinking that, because now there is of course valuable materials where it makes sense to invest in the recycling, building the plants and so on to handle and get those valuable materials. But when the recycling requirements go more tighter, and it might be actually a cost to reach those in part of the certain materials, I was thinking who will be kind of the one who carries the responsibility. But it's the final who sells it to the consumer.
Yes, there is a little fight, but from the OEM side, the thinking is I need to, in the future, put into a new battery, I need to make sure that I have some raw materials I can put in there that are recycled. So in Europe, there's a belief that getting a contract that gets you the hands on the material of a recycler is more valuable even than raw material, which might be cleaner and better for a new battery, but it doesn't help you fulfill these requirements. I think they start in 2031 when you have to put into new batteries recycled materials. That's for cobalt, lithium, and nickel only. They will be trying to secure that. But today, looking at the prices now, because you said the price might get higher, I think it's exactly the other way around. Europeans we're coming from small, trying out high energy costs in Europe, high labor costs in Europe, and small scale so little economy of scale, production lines. We actually charge our customers to give us valuable material. I mean, the money ends up in an energy company. By the way, Uniper had a massive earning, so they have been selling energy at a really high price in Germany, for example, but also in the employees' hands, because we all have to learn how to handle these batteries, and we are really slow at doing the learning, but also doing the operations. Very high safety standards that keep you doing things thoughtful and slow. So we actually charge today, and we don't make a profit on top of that. So it's basically a zero game, and we are hoping that we become faster and by that start earning money. While in the back end, we're still selling quite valuable metals to companies all over the world. And if you look into China, it's kind of a 5 years into the future in Europe and the US, then you can see that depending on the chemistry, you either get paid a little for your battery, if it's a low value chemistry, or you get paid quite a lot for your battery, if it's an NCM or even an LCO chemistry. And we're really far from that in Europe. And there's, that phase is past, but there was some astonishment by most Asian players that it's not being paid in Europe, but that you have to pay to get rid of your material. But it's still the case. Now, with these players coming, the Asian players coming into the market, investing, building bigger lines, having more capacity, the Europeans learning how to do it, the Americans learning how to do it, then of course the prices will turn around and go into, from a recycler's perspective, negative. So we will buy material and actually pay for that and still earn enough to cover the cost of the operation.
It's interesting indeed, and at least in your market, what is easy to predict is the incoming volume increase, because you can see how much the EV batteries are sold every year, and you can have a guess like when they would be recycled afterwards.
Exactly.
Is there some specific trends currently in the industry, or the technologies which are coming up, which you are especially waiting or looking forward to?
Absolutely. Let's say for recycling, a few people might have heard about that company called Li-Cycle from Canada. And the whole world of recycling is looking at them, because what they do, they can take a whole car battery and throw it into a submerged shredder. Submerged means inside that shredder, there is a fluid. It's mostly water, but additives inside. So if that battery is still charged, it has a lot of energy content. If you would shredder that in air, it would basically give a huge fire and some explosions. But the water inside, if you run it in a circle, you put new water in and you take warmed up water out, and you filter some things that are in the water out of the water, you can actually throw charged batteries in there. And that's a huge advantage, because you don't have to do all this manual handling before. It's kind of an automation. But you have some negative effects from that as well, because you dilute some of the material you throw in there into the following processes, and also quite a lot of moisture that you have to work with later on. So everyone is looking at how good can it get, how robust are these shredders to hold out these heat ups and heat downs inside, and how good can you clean up the water, how much does it save you on the manual handling costs. And basically the main question is, will Li-Cycle prevail, or will they, because they are applying this technology in many spots. They have just opened one in Magdeburg in Germany, and they have, I think, one or two in the US and one in Canada, or the other way around. And they are increasing all over the world, the footprint. So, and they apply it again and again, the same technology, while most other players, except for one, it's called Primobius, it's rather small. All the other players, they are choosing the route of dry shredding. Sorry, that's not quite true. There's another player doing this wet process called EcoBat. But most players are applying the dry shredding, because they say the fraction coming out, this black mass that we talked about earlier, that should not get wet. It's really complicated to get it dry again. And we do all this hassle to take the batteries apart and discharge them before, and we pay for that in manual handling fees to get it then to an easier process in this dry version that we run. Stena is one of the dry processes. So it's a big question, and maybe one wins over the other, because it's kind of like, you have a combustion car and you have electric car. They can coexist, but you expect one to kind of win out and take over more market share. So it will not be the end of everybody else, but this is a kind of a battle going on that everybody's very interested in. And we're standing on that dry side, you could say, and watching the wet side. And I guess they are standing on their side and watching us and hoping that we will have higher costs in our production in the end. So that would be in the area where we are. Most technological advancements are happening in the scope of hydro-metallurgical processing, but that I'm really not an expert of. That's where all the startups are and where most of the hype and most of the investment is going on. So
there might be completely some new process which will take over the market later on, but time will show us.
Yeah, and if you read the announcements, most surely, there's a few really, really interesting processes announced, and then there's a few in development in quiet that are still somewhere behind closed doors and have not been announced. And I'm hoping that these will make it easier to recycle this black mass into salts, into clean salts that can go easier into the following processes. An example could be To0. There's two ladies from the RWTH, that's a technical university in Aachen. They have founded a company. They are now in Munich and they run their pilot line. So I'm hoping that they will have success because it's a completely different process. Also, there's fantastic companies, mostly from the US, investing into this hydro-metallurgical topic quite a lot of money, and they have really, really good ideas, but they all haven't been tested at a big scale. So they have to compete with what's there, and they will have to compete with huge economies of scale of companies like BASF that are building a huge factory in Tarragona in Spain. And I'm kind of wishing for the startups to prevail, but I'm also wishing for the economy of scale to kick the costs down. So eventually you can get a battery for less, and the companies that want the battery recycled can get that recycling for less money.
Is the electric vehicle eco-friendly? And largely the issues are in the manufacturing the batteries and recycling them. And yeah, there's a lot of, you mentioned that it's using a lot of energy to process them, but also then there's alternate things where you, for example, use water and so on. So obviously recycling also, it has own environmental questions. Is the process itself efficient, and also how the side products and how well it will be recycled? How do you see that will the kind of recycling part, environmental footprint, will it shrink significantly in the coming years?
Yes, it will develop. And you could say that in recycling, the most of that footprint comes from energy consumption in the processes, and still a lot comes from transportation of the batteries between recycling plants and so on. So that scales with the development of renewable percentage in the power mix of the countries we're doing that in. Looking at Sweden, it's nuclear is green, so nuclear water power mix is very little gas and oil and coal in Sweden. I think it's kind of 90% green mix over all the market. So there you have a super good footprint. Looking at Germany, we've gone back to coal. So we have worsened our footprint from gas, and we're round about, not sure, but 50% renewable right now. So looking at the German footprint, it's still a little bit better than mining. In the beginning of last week, I talked to some LCA analysts, life cycle analysts, that of course life cycle contains more than just CO2 footprint, but CO2 footprint is the one that everyone is auditing right now. And I asked these guys what they think. Is recycling better or is mining routes better in terms of energy footprint or in terms of CO2 footprint? And they said it's clearly the recycling is better, but it might not be as far better depending on which route you take. There's a lot of recyclers, different countries where you do it. It's either a little bit better or a lot better depending on the route you take. And looking in the future, the gap will open a little bit. So the recyclers in the future will have a little bit more less, if you will, of CO2 needed. But for sure, recycling is not CO2 free. And that company that I talked about earlier, called Acrec, they have made a nice graphic showing that, but I can't share it in here. But there you can really see step by step what's happening. So a process, let's say a process of dismantling a battery pack, and you take that aluminum frame out and you give it to a aluminum foundry. That's energy consuming because you have someone going with their car to the company, starting their work in the morning and dismantling a battery. And then you have the lights on and you have a computer running and so on. So you have a little bit of footprint, and you can calculate aluminum mining, so the bauxite mining and so on against that, because the secondary aluminum goes to that foundry, and in the end comes out an aluminum melt that you could get from raw material, and that really, really offsets the energy of that person and his drive to work or her drive to work in the beginning. And that graphics, I mean, that goes even steeper when you look into cobalt and nickel. Then it's interesting. They take back quite a lot of the investment that you have to do, but to get it, you have to, I mean, the process to get cobalt and nickel out, that consumes way more energy than some manual dismantling. But the earnings are even higher, so you still have a little bit of CO2 earned, but always calculated against what if we made a new battery. So maybe the question is, can we somehow, and I think Rika, you said it, can we somehow use less? Maybe drive a little bit less car, maybe take a train. That will actually be much better than having a lot of batteries to recycle.
Who knows what kind of batteries come in the future if we are able to reduce the certain raw materials which are the problem. Yeah, time will show us. And it was very interesting discussion today with you. Thank you coming our podcast.
Thanks for the invitation, and hope to see and hear you soon.
A special offer for our listeners. We are giving you full access to statistics for 30 days by registering at statson.com with the code STATSON, spelled in uppercase STATZON. Thanks for listening to our podcast. Visit our website and get our Text 360 newsletters. If you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe, recommend the podcast to your colleagues, friends, and family, and follow us on social media.